Hey, what's going on? Joe McCall. Welcome to the Real Estate Investing Mastery Podcast. You're in for a treat today. You know, if you ever thought about, wouldn't it be cool to maybe get six-figure assignments? You know, when you're wholesaling a house or vacant land, we try to shoot for $10,000, minimum. But what if you could make $100,000 as an assignment fee doing bigger deals like commercial properties? Now, obviously, I can't guarantee or promise that you're going to make six figures wholesaling deals, but I can tell you this, you'll probably be more likely to make that kind of money when you're wholesaling bigger properties like commercial deals than you would if you're wholesaling houses or recreational vacant land, right? But sometimes when you're thinking commercial wholesaling, commercial deals, big apartments or strip malls or office buildings or whatever, right? It can be real intimidating, can it? It can be like, oh my gosh, I've never done that before. I don't know anybody who's ever done that before. So it can be intimidating. It can be a little scary. And I get it, right? That's why I've asked a good friend of mine, Trent Ellingford, to come on the show today to talk about this. This is a guy who is a commercial real estate investor who does a lot of these bigger deals and has been teaching and helping people do commercial wholesaling. And we're going to be talking about that on this podcast. We're going to be asking him a lot of questions. I'm going to be digging deep into this because I understand I'm a little intimidated by it, right? But I like the idea of finding somebody else that knows what they're doing, who has been there, done that, who has that t-shirt, right? And who knows how to do these deals. And what if I could just find the deals for a guy like him and bring them to him and get these kinds of larger assignment fees, So if you're interested in that, you're in the right spot. We're going to be talking about that with Trent. Let's go ahead and bring him on. By the way, too, I'm going to bring him on here. There he is. Trent, how are you?
Doing very well. Good to see you, Joe.
Thanks, man.
For having me.
So Trent, we've got just in case anybody bails early, we've got a special treat for everybody here. Just so you guys know, I get a lot of people that ask me to be on the show and they just want to talk about their story and how amazing and awesome they are and how they went from rags to riches. And that's that's nice, but I don't like doing those kinds of podcasts. I want to dive deep into the how-to. How do you do this stuff? Explain this thing. Show me how this works. And so I told Trent when we were talking about this, said, hey, let's turn this into a class and let's give away some really cool free things to the audience that they can actually take and implement and use on their own. So we've put together a little, it's a massive a kit for this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to look for the link. Here it is. If you go to joemccall.com/six-figure, the number 6 and then the word figure, joemccall.com/six-figure. Trent has put together a bunch of things here. Number one, he's put together what he calls a commercial wholesaling 101 blueprint. It's a course on how to do these deals step by step of the way. He also did another little course called 7 Steps to Getting Your First Deal Done. He's going to walk through step by step how to get your first. And we're going to be talking about that on our podcast as well today, but this is going to be an additional thing that you can get. He's got a directory of commercial real estate websites and tools that he uses. You're going to get access to this directory. He's got like a glossary of terms. There's a lot of things we're going to be talking about. Expense ratios and net operating income and things like that. And so he's put together a glossary or a directory of terms so you can understand kind of these fancy, complicated words. And he's also got a fancy spreadsheet software that will show you how to come up with, you just put in the numbers and how to come up with a good offer. And it's very simple. We're going to be walking through these kinds of examples and stuff like that. But you can get all of that stuff for free, no strings attached, at joemccall.com/six-figure. The number 6, the word figure, joemccall.com/six-figure. And it's a 101 wholesaling course on how to do these commercial deals. Cool.
Yeah, Joe, I have to say this. First of all, when we did speak and you told me about, I really want to deliver just information, applicable value that people can go out and implement and get results instead of, we can talk about my story, but really, does it matter? Let's talk about kind of the nuts and bolts. What we put together with this, if somebody will take it and go out and implement it, this is all the stuff I wish I had when I started, right? That I've learned over years of trial and error and making mistakes. And so, not to oversell it, but guys, this is a ton of extremely valuable information. So I challenge you to go out and actually use it, because the results that you can get from it are, There's not a lot comparable in the residential space.
No, there's nothing. And this is a very interesting topic that I'm fascinated with. And I want to get more information out to you guys. So the link, if you're watching this on the YouTubes, the link will be in the description below. All right. So Trent, how'd you get started in the business? How'd you get started wholesaling real estate?
I'm going to try and keep this short because I didn't start out as a wholesaler. I started in residential real estate doing single family rentals. I bought my first rental property when I was 22. Actually dropped out of college and had decent enough credit to get a loan, did all the things that I wouldn't do now, contacted a real estate agent, got pre-qualified, did just the traditional process, but I bought a property and I started renting it out to college kids. That was my first investment.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then repeated that process and did it again and did it again. And then when 2007, 2008 hit, I realized there was a lot I didn't know. You pay for education one way or another, and that was an expensive learning experience. And so coming out of the recession, I took a different approach and really started to learn from others, because up until that point, I was just doing it 100% on my own, and took a couple pretty big hits. And then I met a gentleman in Phoenix, Arizona. I was actually introduced to him, who was investing in commercial real estate. I was still in single family. Now, I had wholesale properties, just a couple. It was not my model. It's not what I was doing. But I understood the process. And when I saw what he was doing in commercial real estate and saw his model, honestly, Joe, it was like I looked at this and said, I've been playing in the kiddie pool, because what I saw him doing was not more difficult than what I was doing in residential, but the results were just exponentially larger. And because value, and some of your viewers may know this and some don't, but value in commercial real estate is determined by the income, not so much by comp value in residential. So if you increase the GOI, the gross operating income, increase the NOI, the net operating income, in turn, you increase the value of the property. And when I saw what he was doing, that's what led me to get into commercial real estate. To actually get into wholesaling commercial real estate, I never connected the dots. And, there's no gurus or anybody out there teaching it. There's no courses or classes on commercial wholesaling. So for whatever reason, it just never clicked until we had a property that was a deal. But my partners, I had two partners on it, they wanted to let it fall out because they found something better. And I looked at it and I said, well, no, I could find a buyer for this. And they said, okay, well, we got 7 weeks before money goes hard. So or it's not 7 weeks, 7 days before the money goes hard. So we need to cancel escrow in 6. If you can find a buyer, the next 6 days, cool, we'll sign the contract. And there's more to that story, but the short of it is that's exactly what happened. I found a buyer. We signed an assignment contract for multiple 6 figures on that deal. And then that's when the light bulb kind of went off. It's like, okay, wait, this is something I'd never thought about. Can I do this again? Can I duplicate this? And so that's what led me to where I am now.
And how many years ago was that?
Close to 5.
5 years ago. And What market was this in? Phoenix?
Phoenix, Arizona. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, some people are thinking, okay, interest rates were a lot lower 5 years ago than they are today, right? How has the increase in interest rates affected your business?
Oh, it's definitely affected it. The debt markets, things just don't pencil the same, right? When you go from interest rates at 3.5%, and now on a lot of commercial products, we're looking at 8.5%, if not more. And so there was this lag for a minute where sellers still wanted yesterday's price, but buyers weren't willing to pay it. And so we saw kind of a lull, at least I did. But we're in a place now where a lot of sellers have come to terms with that, and they understand that their pricing's too high. They wish, well, I should have sold 4 years ago. I should have sold 5 years ago, but they didn't. And so if they want to sell, they have to come down on price. But really, Joe, it just comes down to, it opens the door to more creative terms. And so, creative financing has gotten extremely popular. You've taught it for years, and then you have people like Pace Morby who've made subject twos extremely possible, but those aren't new strategies. right? Those
Yeah.
strategies have always been around. And what I tell people too is they're much more common in commercial real estate,
Oh, yeah.
significantly more common. And so seller financing is a big part of what we do. If we can get a seller finance carry at a 3.5% interest rate when the debt markets are 8.5%, then I can help get the seller more for their property, but it still makes sense on a cash flow perspective from the buyer. So it's just about being creative and putting the deals together.
I want to remind people too. I mean, we're not talking about buying and holding these for ourselves. You can, right? But we're just wholesalers. And so it almost doesn't matter what interest rates are doing. As long as you have buyers who are hungry for deals, there's always going to be sellers that need to sell, right? And you just got to put the deals together, and you don't actually close on the deal, and you don't buy it until you have somebody to sell it to or assign it to, right?
That's exactly it. In fact, we don't even let our money go hard. So if you think about it, what's the upside of wholesaling? And I would say this about commercial and residential. I don't think that should ever be your end all be all strategy. Okay. If you want to create some long-term wealth, you need to start holding some assets, have some long-term cash flow. So money's coming in when you're not working, and take advantage of that long-term appreciation. But why is wholesaling residential so attractive? Low barrier of entry, right? You don't have to have a lot of experience. You don't have to be licensed. Also, little to no capital. Maybe you're putting up some earnest money, but it should be refundable within a due diligence time period. But usually with low risk, what do you get? Low reward. So you're getting 5, 10, maybe 15K rips on that. With commercial, you get the exact same benefits as you do with residential. Super low risk. We're not taking on the market risk. We're not taking on the capital risk. But then the upside is significantly bigger.
Yeah. All right. So basic steps to wholesaling a house, is you find where the demand is. That's where I always start, right? You find the markets where there's a lot of activity and high demand for properties. You find motivated sellers, people who own property, they want to sell it. You talk to them, you make an offer. You might have to make a bunch of offers. You might have to do a lot of follow-up. When you get it under contract, you make an offer, get it under contract, then you find a buyer and you bring the deal to them. You either assign the deal or you double close, and you make your money in the middle. You get a property for $100,000, you sell it for $120,000. You make the middle 20 grand. That's your wholesale fee. Same with commercial. Is there any difference?
Almost exactly the same. So the mechanics themselves are super, super similar. It's the nuances of all those little activities that do make it different. If somebody were to just jump in straight from residential to commercial, is it a completely lateral move? No, it's not. Part of the free stuff that we're giving everybody is a glossary of terms. I can't stress how important that is. Just being able to understand the language and have those little bit more sophisticated conversations. But yes, finding that motivated seller. Although seller motivation in commercial is typically a lot different than residential. It's not somebody who's lost their job or they're about to lose the house, it's going into foreclosure. Most of the time, they're approaching their 80s and they're thinking, well, yeah, maybe I would sell. They typically don't have to sell, but they're open to selling. Don't get me wrong, you do occasionally get somebody that was in residential decided they wanted to jump into commercial, bit off more than they could chew, or change asset types, or it's the son and daughter that inherited a property and they live out of state and they want nothing to do with it. But for the most case, it's usually that retirement age later in life that's, you know what, I think maybe now is the time. If it was the right offer, would sell. It's the way you get data is very similar. The way you speak with the sellers is different for sure. The way we structure our offers and underwrite them is different. And the follow-up, though, everybody says the money's in the follow-up, and this is no different. It's building that pipeline. Sellers want to work with people they trust and have a relationship with. And so that's another key thing. And I think where beginners maybe struggle is confidence on the phone.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't done it, it's tough to be confident in something that you haven't done before. But if you're a seller, you want to work with someone that you have confidence that it can actually execute and perform and close this deal, because your deal cycle, this is another important thing, is longer than residential.
Yeah.
Now, you're not tying a property up and turning it in 7 days or turning it in 14 days. The due diligence periods are going to be 45 to 60 days, and then another 30 days on top of that for COE. So you're typically looking at 90 days, close of escrow.
What is COE?
Close of escrow. Okay. So actually closing on that deal. It's a longer cash cycle than residential. But to your point, if you're taking a $100,000 property and you're trying to pull a $20,000 spread on that, well, if it's $1 million property, same percentages, I'm now trying to pull a $200,000 spread on it. That's the reason we can take bigger spreads, is just because the price points are so much higher.
Yeah.
Right. And for beginners, I always tell people, look, the big stuff, you're going to come across it, the $50 million, the $80 million apartment complex or hotel, and you're going to get dollar signs in your eyes. Like, I could make 7 figures. I could make multiple 7 figures. Look, when the home runs happen, great, but focus on the low hanging fruit. Really, the sweet spot is that $1 million to maybe $7-8 million. It's too big for the residential guys. It's too small for the funds and the REITs. So you have this sweet spot where you're not competing against them to get it, but there's still a ton of buyers. And in fact, I'll say one more thing to that too. The buyers are different than residential.
Yeah.
Like, most of your buyers in residential, when the capital markets and interest rates really increased, they started sitting on the sidelines because most of them rely on hard money lenders. You have a lot of commercial buyers that they have to place capital. It doesn't mean they're not going to be more conservative. They're not going to take on wild risk. But if I'm managing $2 billion and I have to pay a return on that money, you got to put that money to work somewhere. And so, I hear about, well, isn't the commercial market going to crash? Look, every market has ebbs and flows, and that's a conversation we can have too, because I always laugh when somebody says, well, isn't commercial due for a crash? I'm like, well, what part? Office, hospitality, industrial, flex, mobile home parks, or like, what are we talking about? Because commercial is so broad, but there's always opportunities. Just position yourself on the right side of it. That's
a really interesting point, because if you think about it, a lot of these buyers, they have a ton of money. They have to deploy it. They've got to put it somewhere.
Have to.
And a lot of them also have 1031 exchanges,
yes.
Right? And they have a deadline of how many months to actually place that money into similar property?
Yep. So they have to identify. They've got a few months to identify, and then they got to place that capital. And, we're working with people right now that have 20 million that they don't want to pay capital gains taxes on that. So they've got to roll that money into something else.
Yeah. So if you don't know what a 1031 exchange is, it's basically when you sell a property that you own, you have a certain number of months to put that money somewhere else in another deal, or you have to pay capital gains taxes. You have to pay taxes on the gains of that money. So that's an interesting perspective. There is, in some ways, these buyers are more motivated than residential buyers because they have to place their money somewhere. It's not earning interest. So they have to place their money somewhere, right? Super important. Now, okay, I want to ask, like, what types of properties? You gave a sweet spot price range. I like that. Between $1 million and $8 million. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think that's just a really good sweet spot to work in.
Okay, so what kind of commercial properties are you looking at then?
So myself and my team, we are, I would say, asset agnostic. We work several different types of property types. Anybody who's new, I definitely don't recommend that. I think you should always go deep before you go wide, because if you're chasing a bunch of different property types, they all underwrite differently. The language is a little bit different. You're going to get very good at not getting anything across the finish line. So pick something. So when I started, the first deal that I actually did, which wasn't really planned, was office. But I really don't do a lot in office, although that is changing, because right now, what is everybody doing? They're running from office.
Yeah.
You practically can't give it away because so many people are working from home, especially in your big MSAs. And investors are looking at, okay, how do we change usage? Can I change it to multifamily? Can I change it to maybe self-storage? Some investors are scraping it, and they're just coming up ground up with new product.
Wow.
So whenever somebody runs away from something, I think there's opportunity, because if it's was selling at $250 a foot, but now we can pick it up for $50 a foot. Well, guess what? People still need office. Not everybody, but people still need office. If we're in it at $50 a foot and put in another 50 and make it the nicest office on the street, well, we're in it for 50% of our competitors. We can actually lower rents and price them out, and we can fill it. So there's still opportunity with that. But during COVID, that was interesting because multifamily skyrocketed in price, right? The demand for affordable housing. Industrial did as well. Most markets, industrial is like 98, 99% occupancy. They couldn't build it fast enough. And so crazy returns. But office, hotels, they were all bleeding money. Like hotels took huge hits because nobody could travel. And after a couple of years of that, I was tying up hotels for pennies on the dollar to flip contracts to multifamily developers to change the usage to apartments, because high demand for apartments, low demand for hotels. And so it was a nice position to be. So that's a long way of me saying,
we were talking about the types of properties, Trent. We were talking about, you said you were property agnostic, but if somebody's beginner, you want them to maybe drill down deeper into a specific type of commercial. So what would be some examples of good types of properties for a beginner to like drill down into?
Yeah. So if you're a beginner, go after the low hanging fruit. There's nothing wrong with singles and doubles. And the nice thing is a single and commercial is still a home run.
You were saying self-storage is great, right?
Yeah, it's gotten a little bit more competitive, but that's actually good news because so many people want it. It's a high demand asset. We have seen a lot of institutional buyers move into the space, meaning hedge funds and REITs. And so you're going to find that it used to be about 80% mom pop owned. That's not the case anymore, but there's still a lot of mom pop owners out there.
Yeah.
And that's the type of stuff I like to target. And I would recommend anybody targeting. So if you look at mobile home parks, RV parks, those are all assets that have like RV parks, it's over 80% of the owners are mom pop owners. Institutions have started to make the move into mobile home parks for sure, but a lot of those are just owner operated. They own one of the homes in the park and they're managing it themselves. They're 84, 85, and they're open to potentially selling. So when you're making that transition from residential, and maybe some people listening are brand new, okay, great. But if you're making a transition from residential to commercial, it's a much more similar conversation because you're speaking, instead of going through attorneys and different brokers, and you're speaking directly to the owners, and they're just average people.
What about smaller strip malls? Are those in that $1 to $8 million range also?
They are, and they do exist, but I don't do a lot of them. So those are typically triple net, meaning that the tenant, they're also paying all the expenses. So it's a straight pass through for the landlord, wherever the gross income is also their net. There's high demand for that retail. And we've had a few of those under contract, but it's not a big focus of ours. It's and really the biggest reason, Joe, is it's a more niche type of buyer, and we haven't put a lot of energy into building that buyer list. So I would never tell somebody not to do it. It's just not our focus or our expertise.
Okay. That's good to know, because that's one of the first things I thought about when I'm thinking commercial real estate. I think strip malls.
Yeah. And in fact, a partner that we work on other deals, that's his focus, is just that retail triple net, and they do extremely well with it. But from a wholesale perspective, we have found the best success with things like self-storage facilities, smaller industrial, mobile home parks, RV parks.
Now, when you say smaller industrial, what do you mean by that? You have some examples?
Yeah, like a 10, 20,000 square foot. Now let's back up. A 200,000 square foot A-class credit tenant industrial building. If somebody had that truly off market and was direct to seller with a contract, I could move that in a heartbeat. I mean, there's such high demand for that. That's a quick phone call and people would gobble that up. There's a bunch of funds and family offices. That stuff's very difficult to get, but that's stuff that'll pay you multiple seven figures. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're beginning, don't try and go after that, because you could spend so much time and energy going down that rabbit hole to never get a deal done. And my experience, and I want to save some people time here, most people that say that they have that, or they say they have the 400 unit apartment complex, they don't. It's a big daisy chain. Nobody's direct. The more links in the chain, the more likely it's going to break. And you can waste hours and hours and hours that you will never get back on a deal that you're never going to get done.
You're talking about, when you're talking about daisy chain, you mean there's a lot of wholesalers in the middle trying to sell this thing.
Correct. There's a lot of people that like to play like they're in the commercial space. I don't know why, but it's reality. Like, I will have people, and here's some red flags. I'll save some of your viewers a lot of time. Somebody hits me up and says, "Hey, Trent, I've got about 30, 40 off-market properties. Can I share them with you?" That's a red flag right there. I'm like,
yeah,
no, you don't. And if they send it to me, it's a list that's being recirculated by a bunch of different people. And they all think, "Oh, I'll tack on $1 million, and I'll tack on $1 million." And so I vet that stuff very, very quickly. And because I know most of it's bullshit. Who holds the contract? If nobody holds the contract, nobody's in control. If they don't, but their partner does, that's code for daisy chain. Who's your partner? Can I have a conversation with him? If I have a buyer and we're putting together this contract, and because sometimes it's, I don't have the contract, but I'm direct to seller, or my partner's direct to seller. Okay, can you set up a call with the seller?
Yeah.
Like, if they can't facilitate those things, then I'm not going to waste my time.
Sure.
Go after the industrial that's 10, 20,000 square feet. It's going to be $1 million to maybe $4 or $5 million. We're back to that mom pop operated. It may be a fairly sophisticated gentleman that owns 4 or 5 of them, but he's not a fund. He's not a family office. He owns them himself. He operates them himself. And what we're looking for is value add, right? Where are some inefficiencies where an end buyer can come in and add value? Below market rents would be the easiest example, because it doesn't take a lot of capital, sometimes none at all, to increase the rents. But you have mom pop owners that have owned, whether it's industrial or multifamily or self-storage or mobile home park, and they've owned it for 10 years, 20 years. They haven't raised the rents in 10 years. Yeah. Because they know the people. Like, that's a common one. I'm like, "Why haven't you raised the rents?" He's like, "Because I know everybody. They know me. I don't want to raise the rents on them."
So you're looking for low-hanging fruit. And in the commercial wholesaling space, you're thinking self-storage, mobile home parks, RV parks, smaller industrial. And
I'd add one more thing to that: small multifamily, like 10 to 50 units, or 10 to 70 maybe. Once you get above 100 units, that's where the funds and the REITs are playing.
Yeah, 10 to 70 units.
Yeah.
Are you doing any new construction, small industrial new construction?
No, new construction is really, now I am partners. Myself and some partners are doing some new construction. Yes. Not my expertise. So I partnered with people who it is their expertise, and we're doing ground up mobile home parks, self-storage, and multifamily. I'm in the process of wholesaling a small 10 unit development that's been entitled. So it's shovel ready for the end investor. We're very close to getting the assignment contract signed on that. But for the most part, no, I don't do.
I'm just wondering if there's opportunity to wholesale vacant land where you could put a small RV. Like I'm thinking of in St. Louis when I'm driving down south to go visit our family lake, there's these lots that are next to the freeway that are popping up where they're building these RV storage parking lots that are covered, and these things, they fill very, very quickly, right? You see them being built, and then the next time I'm going down there in 3 or 4 months, it's full of these RVs and boats that are parked underneath these. And they didn't even pave with asphalt the road, it's just rock. And it's just, so I'm wondering, and you're seeing different vacant lots that are selling modular homes, or they're selling tiny homes, or they're building these little smaller strip malls or little warehouses where they're putting things in there, right? So is there a market for wholesaling vacant land in certain areas to commercial builders that will, investors like you that will build something there?
Most definitely there is. Yeah. And so I know people that operate just in that space alone, and in two different capacities. Some who are finding the land, and if you are wholesaling it, but it's going to be, let's say, turned into an RV park storage, RV park and boat storage, which is, I mean, those things are cash cows, and very little maintenance involved. And like you said, not a whole lot of construction costs involved either.
Yeah.
But if there's a zoning change that has to take place, if you want to wholesale that, you need to make sure that your contract with the seller is contingent on the final approval from the city, because that's what your end buyer is going to want.
Sure.
So that's going to be a longer process. Depending on the size of the municipality, it could be 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year before you get the final approval from the city. That's when the buyer will then let their money go hard and they'll close on the deal. The other side of that is those who don't technically wholesale it, they'll go through the entire entitlement process while it is in escrow. So you can close on and do it, or you can still do it while it's in escrow. Once you get the zoning approval, the uses change, and then the entitlements, then you wholesale at that point. And there's such an increase in value of the land because now it's shovel ready. And in fact, the one that I was just mentioning, that's exactly what the seller is doing. They've taken it all the way up to entitlements. It's ready to go.
So I'm thinking, when I first learned about creative real estate, there was a guy who wrote a book. His name is Thomas Lucier, I think, Lucier, Lucier. And he wrote a book about options. And so this guy, Thomas Lucier, I believe his name was, wrote a book about real estate options. And one of the things he was saying in there is that the commercial real estate space was the ones who kind of invented the creative real estate stuff, and it's much more common and accepted. So one of the things he talked about was options. And when you are doing commercial deals, are you just using regular purchase and sale agreements with a bunch of contingencies in there, or are you doing simple option agreements?
Both, more purchase agreements than option agreements, but options are a great way to approach it. It depends on the deal.
Yeah.
So, and we're wholesaling deals that are actually options. In fact, one right now that we're working on, I just got an offer on it today from a buyer for $9 million. Is a hotel, but the owner of the hotel technically isn't an owner. They have a lease with an option to buy. The option expires in a few months. They're looking to sell their option.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm doing, is working with buyers to bring a buyer to the table to do it, to sell that option. So options can, master lease options can make sense too, where sometimes the numbers just don't quite line up. I've worked with some people in the hospitality space here that tied up multiple properties, all on lease options. Upside for the buyer, less capital out of pocket, right? And they don't have to secure all the debt up front, and they can improve their performance. Yeah. And if they improve the performance with that 2-3 year lease, then it's much easier to get the bank financing they need to then purchase it. So
I can see that being a huge advantage to commercial real estate, because these owners are already going to be more familiar with creative type of structures, right?
Yeah, they are. And, occasionally I'll get the seller this is the only commercial property they own. They've operated themselves their whole life. They're not super sophisticated and they don't understand creative. And so it takes a little bit of time explaining it. In other cases, no, they're very savvy. In most cases, very savvy and understand creative financing. And I'm working with a seller, and this isn't the first time, but working with a seller right now on a self-storage facility. He doesn't want to sell it for cash. He wants to sell or finance it. He doesn't want the big tax implications up front, and he wants the mailbox money. He wants the check coming in every month. And so, to your point, it's very, very common in commercial real estate, and there's a lot of different ways to structure it. To make things work, whether it's doing a interest equity buyout because there's good debt on the property already. So we don't flag the due on sell clause, buy the entity instead of the property, leave the debt in place, and maybe the owner stays in a 5% equity position, but no voting rights, and they don't get paid out, but leave the debt in place, and then a second position, seller carry with a down payment. For me, that's the fun part of the business.
Oh yeah. Are there still the mortgage? Like if there's there's a mortgage on a commercial property, do you still have the due on sale clauses or the things like that to be concerned about creating wraps, creative deals? You still have to be cautious.
Yes,
As cautious with commercial.
you do, but the debt is different. So one of the first things I ask is it assignable? Because a lot of times the commercial debt is assignable.
Wow.
So there's a solution right there.
Yeah.
It's not always. Sometimes it's assignable one time. Okay, great.
Wow.
So part of, and what we're giving your viewers too, is 4 things that we need to know on every property. Now, there's obviously more than we need to know than just 4 things, but there's 4 things I want to know on every property. Number 1, what does the seller want for it, right? What's their price? Number 2, what's it actually worth? Because those are usually 2 different things.
Yeah.
The seller has an idea that he wants $4 million. My numbers are coming in at 2. So based on its income, what is it currently worth? Number 3, what's the value add? Right? What could this property be worth? Forgive me, Joe.
Yeah.
My Sonos is listening to me and just turned on. So number 1, what's the price?
Yeah.
What's it worth? What's the value add? Can we come in, our rents at $1,000 a month and we can raise rents to $2,000 a month? So now instead of being worth $2 million in a year and a half, it's worth $4 million. We just doubled the value. Is there poor management in place? Are there vacancies that can be filled? Are there additional units that could be added or different income generators? And then number 4, is there debt on the property?
Yeah.
And if there is debt, how much? Because, a lot of times it's free and clear. Okay, great. Seller financing makes the most sense. But if there is debt, if I don't ask that question, I might come in with an offer on a $2 million property. I'm going to offer 10% down, $200,000, and then find out that doesn't work because of their debt position. So anyway, there's always different ways to structure it, but those are key things that we need to know so we structure it correctly.
Yeah, good. And you cover that in the Wholesaling 101 commercial blueprint and the 7 steps to your first deal, the directory of real estate websites and tools, the glossary of terms, all the stuff. I'm sure we've given out 6 of them that you're probably like, what is that? And a calculator shows you how to come up with these offers. Again, go to joemccall.com/6figure to get all this and dive deeper into more details. All right. So I want to ask you, Trent, how do you find these deals? Can you do direct mail? Can you knock on doors, cold calling? Do you do PPC? What do you do?
So you can do all the above. And I want to tie this back to something you said before too, that commercial can be overwhelming. I think initially, even if have a lot of experience in residential, and the next lateral move typically is somebody wants to move out of residential, is they'll maybe step into multifamily, right? Because multifamily basically is just residential at scale. There's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about commercial, and what makes it really seem confusing is the language, I think, because it is different. Instead of saying down payment, we're talking about equity. Instead of saying mortgage, we're saying debt. It's the same thing, but you want to be able to talk the talk a little bit. I think it's actually easier in a lot of ways because it's not subjective. It's just based on the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. So once you learn how to run the numbers, and that's the other thing, I think people overcomplicate the underwriting process too. And like a hack that I use is expense ratios, which we're giving your viewers that as well. So just a quick way to back in and determine what the numbers, the value is on a property. But when it comes to finding off-market deals, yes, direct mail works, and I've done direct mail. I've done SMS. I have not done PPC or SEO. That may work in commercial. I don't know. My opinion, and I'd love for somebody to prove me wrong, is it's one thing to find people that are searching, how do I sell my house fast for cash or something like that? I think it'd be a little less common in commercial, but I'm not speaking from experience. I haven't done it. Our bread and butter is cold calling. Yeah. That's it. Calling and having a conversation with the seller. That's where we get our leads. That's where we get our deals.
Nice. I knew a guy that would send offers to sellers, mainly smaller multifamilies. So 4 to 10 units, maybe four, I'm trying to remember. This has been years since I talked to this guy. But he would look at each deal based on, and he would take a lot of guesses on what the rents were, the condition of the property, what percentage of the units were occupied, and all of that. And he would send an actual proposal in the mail. The cover letter, hey, we want to buy your property, and based on these assumptions, we could offer you this. If you're interested, give me a call. And it was a lot of upfront work. It wasn't something that you could do just a bunch at a time, but he got a lot of deals from that. And I've always thought that was fascinating. Do you do anything like that in commercial?
I do not, but I know it's effective and I like it. And because you're right, there is a lot of upfront work that goes on. So you want to be extremely targeted on the properties and where you're sending an offer, but what it's saying is you are serious.
Oh yeah.
Right. You're not kicking tires. You've actually put together a formal offer. I have a buddy of mine, a mentor of mine that taught me a lot about commercial real estate. He would do something very similar. He would even take it a step further. He would open escrow. If it was something he really liked, he said, call the title company. There's $100,000 sitting in an escrow. You just need to sign. And so it would make it real for the sellers. Like, wow, we're going to get that money. So he had a lot of success just being aggressive and taking that extra step that others wouldn't take because of the volume of what we do. Meaning the amount of deals that we'll take under contract and we're underwriting it at once. I haven't taken that step. I still like it, but we have people that they're pounding the phone. That's it. And I tell anybody, look, this really is a simple business. I know it can seem overwhelming at first. It can seem complicated. It really is a simple business. You got to pick an asset and then pull some off-market data. How do we contact them? And how we contact a storage facility is going to be a little bit different than how we contact a mobile home park. So contact them, have a conversation. What information do we need to get so we can make a decision? I can back into a ballpark number, just like your friend that's sending in those offers right there on the phone. Based on, if I have an idea of what they made last year and what they're on track to make this year, I can put in a verbal offer. And if they don't like it, that's okay. Because at least now we have a dialogue and I can use that to get more information from them and take it back to my quote unquote underwriting team to come back with a more official offer.
I'm thinking this is why I wanted to get you on, because you have the experience to do this. And if somebody wanted to go into wholesaling commercial, they know that you have their back, right? Like you can actually close on the deals and you can actually evaluate them and tell them, hey, yeah, this is a good deal, or no, it's not, go back, offer them this instead. But I imagine too, if somebody is like wanting to bring you deals, you have the financial backing behind you. So like if they wanted to send an offer, you probably have something like a proof of funds or a letter from a bank or experience of some kind of resume that you could show. It says, hey, we have this experience doing these deals, and we have already a certain line of credit established or whatever. We can close these deals quick. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the most common things I've heard from beginners is, hey, they ask for proof of funds, or they ask me about my experience and what I own. How do I get past this? What's really interesting is I very rarely get asked for proof of funds when I'm speaking to a seller. I very, very rarely, or about my other deals. But that's just because of the confidence I have with them on the phone. And within just a minute or 2 minutes of speaking with them, they're at ease and like, okay, he's sophisticated, he understands the business. And so they now have confidence that I can actually perform. That is an obstacle, I think, for when somebody's new. And so, yes, we have the relationships, we have the POFs if needed. People I work closely with, I teach them how to build that confidence and certain things to say and also certain things to ask. So instead of you chasing and wanting their business, they're now wanting to work with you. If you can kind of position yourself and change that, that's super effective. And just being able to speak with confidence so they don't get asked those questions. But when they do, that's a huge piece, is being able to leverage somebody who's been doing it for a long time. Yeah. And so now the the seller has confidence in working with that individual. And, Joe, that's kind of, I know you've scaled businesses and you've been in real estate for a long time. And there's, at least for me personally, when I look at it, there's always this like give and take, like especially wholesaling. Because I told you I wasn't a wholesaler before. The reason I got into the business was because I wanted to create cash flow and I wanted to create long-term wealth. When I saw that I could make $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 just moving the paper from one side of the table to the other, that's worth my time and energy. Because what a lot of people don't have is liquidity to be able to buy that asset. If you do that a couple of times, now you have enough for that down payment. You've negotiated seller financing on a great storage facility that's going to give you $8,000 a month, not 800, $8,000 a month in cash flow, right? There's the difference between residential and commercial. Yeah. Why not buy it? You've negotiated 3% interest. You only have to put $200,000 down. Awesome. So what I really stress to everybody is learn the acquisition piece. Because if you learn how to find good deals and get them under contract, you can then pick the exit, right? If it's really a good deal, you can wholesale it. If it's really a good deal, you can raise the capital to buy it, or you can keep it yourself. So focus on that. But for me, when it came to like scaling a wholesale business typically involves a big team, right? You need people on the phone getting leads. You need closers, your acquisition team, you need the TC, you need the dispo side. There's also training involved, and then there's turnover. And to me, where I'm at in my life, I just didn't really have interest in doing that. It seemed like buying myself a job. Because when I went all in on commercial wholesaling, here was the really cool thing about it. My top line was my bottom line. I wasn't running ads. Wasn't doing any type of marketing. Just making phone calls. I didn't have admins and acquisitions and dispositions, whatever. So if I wholesale the property and made $300,000, I made $300,000 on that deal.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to go out and do 50 deals in a year. I don't know about your viewers, but how many? That's more than a lot of attorneys and CPAs and doctors making an entire year. And we're talking about that on one deal. So yes, the deal cycle is longer, but what if you did 2, 3, or 4 of those in a year's time? Yeah. So for me, it was like, okay, it's not about more deals. It's about better deals. It's about bigger deals. But with what's taking place right now, and what I mean by that with multifamily, so much of it was bought when interest rates were super low, but it was bought on bridge debt. That's short-term debt, right? 5 years. That stuff's coming due. And to refinance out of it and pay their investors and keep the property, well, interest rates are now 6.5%, 7.5%, 8%, whatever it may be. Most banks are saying, okay, we'll refinance it, but we're not going to refinance 70, 75%. We're only going to refinance 55, 60, 65%. So you got to bring another $3 million to the table. There's whenever there's difficulty, there's opportunity. Yeah. And so you can just see it and you can feel it, and it's happening right now. And there's going to be another huge transfer of wealth. So for me, it was like, okay, do I go out and build a team and train and manage, or do I teach other people how to do exactly what I'm doing and then partner with them on deals? And those who want to go in and put in the work will partner, and those who don't, well, that's on them, right? So that's what kind of led me to what we're doing now, because I would say 50, maybe 60%, at least 50% of the deal flow we have right now are just from everyday people that we've started working with, and they're out there finding the deals and bringing them to us. So it's really cool.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. And we just have a few more minutes here. But again, guys, if you want this course and you want to learn how to bring deals to Trent so that he can buy them, go to joemccall.com/6figure. I just wanted to ask you about how do you make the offers? And you talked about you had to determine the income, the gross operating income, the net operating income, and you make your offers based on expense ratios, I think you said here.
Correct.
So explain that and kind of walk through some example deals.
So cap rate. I've seen videos where people take an hour to train on cap rate and make it really, really confusing. Cap rate is really simple. It's the return that you're getting on that property. So for simple math, if I have $1 million property and I buy it at a 10% cap rate, I'm getting a 10% annualized return on my $1 million, which is $100,000. Okay. That 100,000 is my NOI, my net operating income. So on a commercial property, you're going to have your gross income. That's all the rents plus any other income that comes in on the property, late fees, parking, whatever else you may have. Then you back out all of your expenses, and then you have your NOI. And based on that NOI, we now know what the value is.
So, and that NOI is before any mortgage debt.
Correct. Before any mortgage debt. And that's a great point. So I'm glad you bring that up, because cash flow and NOI are two separate things.
Right.
Because we do have to take the debt into account. But the reason debt is not considered part of determining cap rate or NOI is because cap rate tells us how the asset performs,
right? Not
how our money performs, right? If Joe buys it with only 10% down and seller financing at 3% interest, but I put 25% down and get conventional debt at 8% interest, our money is going to perform very differently on a cash flow basis, but the asset performs the same.
Yeah.
So the way I use that is if I'm having a conversation with the seller and I get to know them, find out a little bit more about their property, and then they tell me their gross income last year was $200,000. Well, if it's a self-storage facility, I know their expenses are going to be somewhere around 30 to 40% of their gross income. So I just use an expense ratio of 35%. So I know for every $100,000, about 35% of that is going to go towards expenses. So if they're brought in $200,000, well, only about $130,000 of that is their NOI. Now, if I need to get that at a 10 cap, which I don't, I could be a little more aggressive than that. But at a 10 cap, 130,000 times 10% is 1.3 million. There's my number. 1.3 million, and I'll make a verbal offer on that 1.3.
And so different types of commercial have different expense ratios and different cap
rates. Yes.
So can you run through an example of the different expense ratios of the different, you mentioned self-storage, mobile homes, RV parks.
Yeah. So self-storage, I use a 35%. Multifamily is probably the most subjective because cap rates change market to market, where self-storage for the most part trades and when I say trade, what it sells for, they trade for about the same cap rate nationwide. Multifamily, that's not the case, but I use a 40% expense ratio. I know groups that use higher, they'll do 50% plus, but 40% is my number. That's a good starting point for multifamily. With self-storage, I like 35%, except for maybe certain markets where insurance has gone up, like Florida, I'll bump it up to 40%. But those are pretty spot on. What the other really cool thing about it, Joe, is it'll help you uncover opportunity, and it'll also help you I'm all about efficiency. I don't want to spend weeks working on a deal that doesn't have legs in the first place.
Sure.
So if somebody comes in, because I'll say, hey, Trent, I have this great deal. It's at a 10 cap. Very first thing I look at, gross income, expenses. I'm going to take the expenses, divide it by the gross. I'm like, well, actually, their expenses are only 15%. That's great for them, but any end buyers are going to be closer to 35%,
right?
Because they're not going to self-manage it, right? Their expenses, they're going to be more. So that's not a 10 cap. It's actually a 5, or it's actually a 7, whatever it is. So you can sniff that out. But I've also had it the other way, where I've had it come and the expenses are 70%. Like, why are these so high? And then I find out they're paying themselves a salary of $100,000 a year, and they're making their car payments through it. Okay, we can normalize it and take that stuff out and get it back to 35%. And all of a sudden, this deal that didn't look like a deal actually is, once we normalize the expenses. So that's self-storage. For mobile home parks, 35%. If it's city water and sewer, if it's a well and septic, I'm going to use 40%. With an RV park, it depends if it's long-term tenants, because some RV parks basically are mobile home parks. They just haven't been dropped on a foundation. Right. It's affordable housing. And if that's the case, you don't have all that turnover, your expenses are going to be a lot less. So 35%. If it's all transient, it's going to be 55%.
Okay.
You're going to find a lot of RV parks they're a mix, some long-term, some transient. So it's going to be like 45%. But I broke all those down, and that's a free gift to everybody just for tuning in and listening. It's a great tool to use to help analyze and determine value.
So that's in the calculator and the classes that you have.
Correct.
Again, this is all free. joemccall.com/6figure. And the reason why Trent's doing this is because he wants more deals. He's got a bunch of money. He's got capital that he needs to spend. He's got buyers that got a bunch of capital that they need to spend. And he's looking for bird dogs. He's looking for people that will bring him deals. And as I'm listening to this, I'm really interested in this. I'm thinking back about what my friend did where he was sending offers. I mean, what if, guys, you could learn how to find these deals, learn how to create offers, and just send a bunch of offers? You send 100 offers, you're probably going to get some phone calls, right? What if you could send 100 offers every month to these properties? Trent will also be talking about like what markets to stay in, what markets to avoid, right? You probably talk about staying away from certain states, certain counties, and certain areas. Right?
Absolutely. In fact, in the free training that they get as well, which I think you're going to drop that link, I talk about all that stuff too. Like what states we focus on, which ones we stay out of, what's I consider to be the low-hanging fruit. And if you're starting, here's where I would start and what I would go after. So yeah, I break all that down.
Nice. Again, joemccall.com/6figure. Check that out. And Trent, sure appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Yeah, man. It's been a pleasure. Good seeing you. Thanks for having me on. And within all that stuff at Joe McCall, the 6FA, guys, there's a free, much more in-depth training as well that'll walk you through this. So if it resonates with anybody, guys, go out and make it happen.
Yeah, we flew through this pretty fast, but joemccall.com/6figure, and the description will be in the YouTube video down below. All right. Got to go, Trent. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye, everybody.